It's 10 o'clock. Welcome to The World Tonight with Carolyn Quinn. Good evening. President Assad has given a defiant television interview saying his forces hold the balance of power in Syria and he'll strike back against Israel if attacked again. In Qusair, the city experiencing the fiercest fighting, a hospital doctor describes conditions there.
There are kids and women that are dying. They're without water and bread. They're waiting 3 to 4 days just for drinking water.
A man described in court as a pathological liar and a paedophile has been jailed for life for the abduction and murder of April Jones. The government has said it'll fight a European court case which claims some migrants are being discriminated against when they try to claim benefits. And all this week we've been looking at where jobs and growth may come from in the UK economy. Tonight, a more pessimistic view.
All our policymakers like to think, or at least pretend that they think, that there is a way to fix things. A bit of quantitative easing here, new railway there, that kind of thing. But the truth is that there probably aren't any quick fixes to our economic problems. Perhaps there aren't any fixes at all.
That's all after the BBC News read this evening by Corey Caulfield.
The man found guilty of the murder of April Jones has been told he will never be released from prison. The 5-year-old was abducted as she played with a friend near her home at Machynlleth in mid-Wales in October last year. The police said Mark Bridger, who's 47, had gone to enormous lengths to destroy evidence, conceal his involvement and avoid detection. Our correspondent John Brain reports from Mould, Crown Court.
In a statement read to the court on her behalf, April's mother, Coral Jones, said she would live with the guilt of letting April go out to play the night she was abducted for the rest of her life. How will we ever get over it, she asked. Sentencing her daughter's killer, Mr Justice Griffith Williams told Bridger he was a pathological liar and a paedophile who'd added to the torment of April's family with his hypocritical sympathy and tears of self-pity. The Crown Prosecution Service described him as a violent, cold-hearted murderer. But as Bridger begins his whole life sentence, April's body still hasn't been found. It's been revealed that while awaiting trial, Bridger admitted to a prison chaplain that he'd dumped her in a river. But it's thought possible his confession could have been just yet one more of his many lies.
President Assad has said Syria will respond in kind to any further Israeli attacks on targets in his country. In an interview with a television station in Lebanon run by Hezbollah, he said his forces had won major victories against rebel fighters and now held the balance of power. Mr Assad was vague when asked whether Syria had received the first controversial shipment of Russian anti-aircraft missiles, fulfilling a deal which has been criticised by Israel and the US. From Lebanon, Jim Muir reports.
Asked specifically about the S-300 missiles, which are currently the focus of much tension, Mr Assad said arms contracts with the Russians went back over a period of years. Part of them had been fulfilled, and the rest would proceed without regard to the current crisis. This left open the question of whether S-300 missiles have indeed been supplied. Asked how Syria would react to any more Israeli airstrikes, there have been 3 so far this year, Mr Assad said Damascus had made it clear it would strike back blow for blow. Turning to the proposed peace conference the Russians and Americans are hoping to hold in Geneva next month, Mr Assad said it wouldn't be surprising if it failed, because the states backing the opposition didn't want it to succeed. He said Syria would in principle attend the talks if there were not unacceptable preconditions, and hoped to negotiate with the countries which are backing the opposition.
A 22-year-old man has appeared in court charged with the murder of the soldier Lee Rigby in south-east London last week. Michael Adebowale spoke only to confirm his name, address and date of birth. He was remanded in custody and will appear at the Old Bailey on Monday. A second man, shot and detained at the scene of drummer Rigby's killing, Michael Adebolajo, remains under armed guard in hospital. The Work and Pensions Secretary, Ian Duncan-Smith, has vowed to fight every step of the way against European Commission claims that Britain's welfare system is discriminatory. The Commission is taking the government to court, accusing it of breaking the rules by making EU nationals living in the UK pass an additional test to see if they're eligible for social security benefits. Mr Duncan-Smith said he would not cave in to pressure.
The agreement in all the treaties was that this area of social security, social welfare, was a matter that was left to national governments. It was not something that the European Commission and the courts were meant to get involved in. The Commission is trying to use the freedom of movement as a way in to start controlling what national governments do about those who are not in work in their countries. It's, I think, a blatant land grab.
The European Commission has asked Spain to respond to complaints that British and other EU citizens have been asked to pay for emergency medical treatment. Anyone carrying a European health insurance card should be treated without charge. The Commission's request for information is the first stage in a legal process which could lead to a fine. The Spanish government said it would cooperate fully. A UN court has acquitted 2 former Serbian security chiefs of being behind mass killings and torture during the Balkans conflict 20 years ago. Judges at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia found there was insufficient evidence to convict the 2 men, who were close allies of the late Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic. The Archbishop of York, Dr. John Sentamu, has disclosed that he's being treated for prostate cancer. He said he'd undergone an operation at a hospital in Leeds and would be out of action for some time. Sankita Maisko reports.
In his statement, the Archbishop described his operation as one for locally advanced prostate cancer and said he was looking forward to resuming his ministry as soon as possible. Elected in 2005, Dr. Sentamu is the Church of England's first black archbishop. The 63-year-old's informal touch has earned him the nickname the People's Cleric. In 2007, he cut up his dog collar on live television in protest at Robert Mugabe's rule in Zimbabwe. More recently, he skydived to raise money for injured servicemen and women and has criticised the bankers he said were responsible for the financial crisis.
This spring looks set to be the coldest for more than 50 years. The Met Office has been analysing temperatures over the past 3 months. More details from Jeremy Cook.
These latest figures from the Met Office say that lower than average temperatures in the past couple of weeks have helped make the spring of 2013 the coldest since 1962. Across the UK, the mean temperature through March, April and May was 6 degrees centigrade compared to the average of 7.7 degrees. A spring which saw snow in Shropshire in May began with an exceptionally chilly March, with a mean temperature of 2.2 degrees, well below the average of 5.5 degrees. The forecast is for an unsettled June.
Reports from Brazil suggest that the country's football friendly with England has been suspended because of concerns about the safety of the ground where it's to be played. The teams are due to meet at the newly refurbished Maracana Stadium in Rio on Sunday.
Thank you, Corey. You're listening to The World Tonight with Carolyn Quinn. According to President Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian army has scored major victories against rebels and now holds the balance of power in the conflict there. Russia, he insisted, was fulfilling its contracts to supply arms to Syria. But in an interview with the Hezbollah-linked Al-Manar TV station in Lebanon, President Assad was vague when asked if the sophisticated Russian anti-aircraft weapons system to which Israel objects had already been delivered. His tone was defiant. He vowed to retaliate if Israel acts on its threat to destroy that Russian anti-aircraft system. And he said the Syrian people wanted to open up a new front on the Golan Heights, which Israel has occupied since 1967. He was asked about Hezbollah fighters from Lebanon supporting his troops in the battle for the border town of Qusayr. He said Syria didn't need outside help to defend itself against what he called terrorists. His words are spoken by a translator.
لنتحدث بشكل منطقي إذا كان يريد حزب الله أن يدافع عن سوريا أو
المقاومة. If the Hezbollah want to defend Syria,
كم ترسل؟
they will send some fighters here.
2000
hundreds, thousand, maybe 2,000. But there are millions, hundreds of thousands of the Syrian army against these small numbers. And the feeding of terrorists by armor and otherwise is being continued by other countries outside. In comparison with those terrorists which are there, we are defending our country.
Meanwhile, inside Syria, fierce fighting continues in Qusayr, a strategically vital town on the border with Lebanon that's become a key battleground. More than 50,000 residents are said to be trapped in the town, while forces loyal to President Assad, backed up by Hezbollah fighters, continue their offensive. The head of the Syrian National Coalition, the main opposition group outside the country, has said that it will not attend a major peace conference planned for next month while the mass killing continues in Qusayr. He appealed for international help for people that he said were trapped in the town. We managed to get through to a doctor who's based at a hospital in the north of Qusayr. He described conditions there.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا
I'm in a city north of Qusayr. It's called Dabbar. We're close to the airport. The situation at the moment is very bad. The Free Syrian Army are just unable to control the situation here. We have more than 600 people that are injured, and we don't have any access to any medical assistance or medical aid at the moment.
The rebels there have been under heavy attack, haven't they, for the past week or so? Are they still managing to hold out, do you know, in parts of the town?
At the moment, the Free Syrian Army have control of at least 80% of the city, although the regime have control of some of the suburbs and the outskirts of the city. Two cities at the moment they still have control over are Buwaida and Al-Daba. The battle, though, is getting bad. There are kids and women that are dying in the battle for more control.
Could you describe for us then what's happening there right now? What conditions you're living in? What are the women and children in the town doing?
The situation that they're living out it can only be described as oppression. They're without water and bread. They're waiting 3 to 4 days just for drinking water. That doesn't even include water that they need for everyday use, for washing their clothes, for their normal day-to-day activities. For the last year, the food that they have that we have in our house are just the staples, rice. Very, very basic means. Everyone's very sad. A lot of crying and a lot of sadness.
Have you seen evidence of Hezbollah fighters involved with the Assad forces?
Yes, we've seen them with our own eyes, and we have many corpses of members of Hezbollah that have been fighting on the ground and that have lost their lives.
Have they been making a difference to the strength of the Assad forces?
Yes, I definitely believe that Hezbollah have made a huge difference. 2 years into the fighting, it started off with the Free Syrian Army and the Assad's regime, and after 2 years they were tired of fighting almost. But Hezbollah have definitely changed the game. They've come in and they've definitely strengthened the Assad army in Qusayr.
Qusayr holds a very strategic position, important to both sides. Syrian government officials are saying that there will be a way for civilians to leave and fighters to put down their arms, free to leave as well. Is anyone taking up that opportunity?
Up until now, he hasn't let a single child leave the city. And he actually wants Hezbollah to come and take the lives of our women and children. We would rather stay here and die than leave our land.
The Syrian National Coalition has said that it won't take part in peace talks next month while the killing continues in Qusayr. What does he make of that?
While the killing continues, we are very much still we stand by what the Syrian National Council and Coalition are saying. So yes, we support what they have said today.
How long do you think the opposition can hold out if the assault continues by the Assad forces backed up by Hezbollah?
Hezbollah are strangers to this land. This is our land. So we feel that we will continue until we have to. There's no time. We will fight until the end, and even if that means that we'll die here.
Speaking to us earlier through an interpreter, a doctor based in a hospital in the north of Qusayr. So why is this city so strategically important for both the rebels and for President Assad and the Hezbollah fighters, who for the first time are playing an open role alongside his government forces? Questions I put earlier to Paul Salem, director of the Carnegie Middle East Centre.
Well, the Assad regime and Hezbollah are trying to secure a strategic corridor that would link the capital Damascus with the Alawi homeland in the northwest of the country and the mountains and the coast of the Syrian northwest. They figure that this battle is a long-term battle. If they can continue to hold the capital and the northwest indefinitely, then they could ride this out, maybe survive it, even if they're not able to reclaim control of other parts of the country. For Hezbollah, it's important, first of all, to help the Assad regime survive and achieve these objectives, but also more directly, Hezbollah is interested in securing a sort of a buffer zone all along the Lebanese border, which includes Qusayr, includes the eastern part of the Lebanese-Syrian border, which is next to Damascus, because Hezbollah is also afraid of Sunni and radical Sunni groups in the northern and eastern parts of Syria that could threaten Hezbollah in the Bekaa Valley. So if they can secure a strategic buffer, as it were, on the Syrian side, that would protect Hezbollah's positions inside Lebanon, particularly in the Bekaa Valley.
But how decisive do you think will be the intervention by Hezbollah?
Well, Hezbollah has concentrated its efforts in this corridor. It's not visibly fighting in other parts of the country where, of course, the Assad regime is engaged in battles. It's an area that's very close to the Lebanese border. It's a part of Lebanon which Hezbollah has, for a long time, had a very strong military presence. They are a very, very effective fighting force, and that has been confirmed by people on the rebel and opposition side in Syria to say that indeed the Hezbollah presence is large and has made a difference. Now, Hezbollah has only recently come out publicly and openly saying that it's fighting us alongside the Assad regime. They now feel comfortable doing that because they calculate that the Assad regime is not about to collapse, so it's sort of not a losing bet. And also their concern about Sunni radicalism and so on has enabled them to justify, at least partially to their people, that we're fighting jihadi-style Sunni radicals in Syria, so we don't have to fight them inside Lebanon.
Do you think that the open involvement in Hezbollah, plus the talk of Russian missiles coming into Syria, will increase the potential of more involvement by Israel?
Yes, I mean, certainly there's been much more tension across the Israeli, Lebanese and Israeli-Syrian border, mainly because of the question of missile systems coming to Syria or from Syria going to Hezbollah. Hezbollah and Syria have sort of had let's say, an understanding since the 2006 war. There's been really no serious incidents along that border for the last 7 years. The involvement of Hezbollah in Syria actually is not displeasing to the Israelis because they'd be happy to see Hezbollah go get busy in some other conflict rather than focusing on Israel. But as the Assad regime is increasingly under pressure, whether it decides to move weapon systems to Hezbollah at this stage, transfer of weapons of this type is likely to trigger a massive Israeli attack and lead to all-out war, at least between Israel and Hezbollah. So that risk is very, very high. There is a danger that the rhetoric and the bluster from Hezbollah and Assad, linked with the concerns of Israel, might trigger a serious confrontation.
Paul Salem, director of the Carnegie Middle East Centre. Throughout the week, we've been hearing from experts across the world of business and economics about the problems faced by Britain in generating growth and jobs. Yesterday, for example, we heard how the UK might be affected by lower growth forecasts for the Eurozone that have been issued by the OECD. Tonight, Money Week's editor-in-chief, Merryn Somerset-Webb, takes a step back and asks whether there are even bigger structural problems that are getting in the way of a growing British economy.
I'm in the centre of Edinburgh today, where I live. If you look around this city, it's got the air of a really vibrant place. But if you scratch beneath the surface, things aren't quite as they seem. Low growth means there aren't as many jobs around as there were, and even for those in work, pay isn't rising quite like it used to. So with the cost of living rising, just as is the case pretty much everywhere else, living standards are falling. All our policymakers like to think, or at least pretend that they think, that there is a way to fix things. A bit of quantitative easing here, new railway there, that kind of thing. But the truth is that there probably aren't any quick fixes to our economic problems. Perhaps there aren't any fixes at all. Comes down in large part to debt and demography, both things we can't magic away regardless of how much we tinker with fiscal and monetary policy. This means that one of the most sacred of our cows, the idea that each generation gets to have a higher standard of living than their parents, has come to an end. It's a situation in which there are likely to be many more losers than there are winners. This is something that today's graduates such as Tom Rose, are finding out to their cost.
My degree was in sustainable development. I was able to get a placement after I graduated, but that was only sort of a maternity cover position, and there's just been nothing else available at the moment. You know, I'd be quite happy at working in a shop, a bar, just to be doing something at least.
Do you feel, Tom, that it's been harder for you to get started in a professional life than maybe it was for your parents' generation?
I think it is, because a lot more younger people are going to university now, and with the current economic situation, a lot of companies are having to scale back, forces graduates to maybe lower their expectations for pay and salary and holiday entitlement and things like that.
Tom may well find the kind of job he wants in the next couple of years, but there is very good reason to believe that the economy as a whole can't grow fast enough to deliver the expectations of many recent graduates. That sounds miserable, but you know, while it isn't ideal, I do think it's important to keep it in perspective. We all assume that living standards should only ever rise and rise and rise, but we've just seen 30-odd years of huge rises in living standards. I was a child of the 1970s, and if you ask me or ask any of my friends what they actually remember from the 70s, they'll mostly mention the cold and the boredom. Not much in the way of central heating, TVs, toys, video games. A very different life to the comfortable, consumer-driven ones that most of us, not all of us, but most of us live today. Paul Hodges, chairman of consultancy group International Echem, shares my view that one of the main things holding back growth in the UK is the speed at which our population is ageing.
I mean, what we're seeing today is the impact of the ageing society, which is, in fact, a great triumph, that people are living much longer. And the corollary of living much longer is you have slower growth. But today already we've got over a quarter of the UK population is over 55, and we're going to a situation fairly soon where it will be about a third of the population.
Why do you have slower growth just because you have an older population? How does that work?
Well, the government data shows that for household spending, which is 60% of the UK economy, therefore the biggest single item, what happens is it peaks at around the age of 50 at £30,000, and as you go down towards retirement, it goes down to £20,000. So a pretty big fall pretty quickly, for simple reasons that when you're moving up to the age of 50, the kids are at home, they're growing, you need this, you need that, you need all these other things, so you're buying them new. Then, once you get over 50, the kids are leaving home, you need less, you don't need new stuff anymore.
We've come to the Merchants Golf Course now, just on the edge of the rather pleasant district of Morningside in Edinburgh. It's a beautiful day, lovely green, looking out over the Pentland Hills, and we're going to go into the clubhouse now and talk to some of the lucky baby boomers who are able to while their time away drinking cups of coffee while they wait for a round of golf. We're going to talk to Moira, Robert and David. Well, let's start by talking a little bit about retirement. Robert, you're not quite retired.
I started retiring when I was 59. Financially, it's comfortable. I have a final salary pension, so yes, comfortably financially, yeah.
So has your lifestyle changed since you retired in terms of how much you spend and how you live?
Yeah, we don't spend as much money as we used to when we had small children. Got 4 grandchildren. Yeah, we spend money on them. And maybe they think we should spend more.
I bet they do. Maura, you're retired as well?
Yes, I've been retired for 7 years now. And I've enjoyed myself hugely since then.
And how do you enjoy yourselves? What do you do?
We play golf a lot, we play tennis, and we go on holiday, we visit the family, and we just have fun.
Okay, now you're the captain of the golf club.
Yes.
And you also happily retired?
Happily retired. Again, retired early at the age of 58. We still spend money ourselves, probably more on pleasure than we used to do when you had financial constraints.
The security of your financial future, it comes down to a large degree with all of you actually to pensions. You all have a final salary pension of some kind that means that you have a good base income guaranteed throughout the rest of your lives, which is something that perhaps the younger generation can't rely on.
Just so. Exactly, agree with you.
Although of course they'll get to inherit your money in the end.
If there's any left.
The lucky generation. I'm so envious of all of you. I'd do anything for a final salary pension. Of course, it isn't just demographics that is giving us slower growth. The other large headwind facing us is the unprecedented level of debt we've built up in both the private sector and the public sector. Bruce Stout, manager of the Murray International Investment Trust, feels, as I do, that paying the interest on that debt and making an effort to pay it down will keep growth in the UK low for a decade.
Unfortunately for the so-called developed world, so dependent on consumption and so dependent on credit for so long, that a lot of future demand has been consumed already. That's what the debt binge amounted to. And unfortunately it's payback time now, which means overall lower levels of growth and unfortunately overall lower levels of opportunity for the next generation that comes through.
The people most affected by all this are inevitably the young and the poor, but low growth coupled with regular doses of inflation are making life harder right across the board. Lucy and her husband live just outside Edinburgh with their 2 children. They run a restaurant business.
The economy has definitely gone down and it's affected our restaurant business and takeaways and things like that. People are not going out as often.
And what effect has it had on your lifestyle? It's reduced your income from the business, and so have you changed the way you live as a result?
My husband is working more. Before he was maybe off 2 to 3 times a week, some evenings. Now he's away to work sort of 6 days a week, and even on his day off he still goes in just to make sure everything's running properly, it's done properly.
So what about you? Are you now spending less money than you were?
Very much so. I think I'm more careful in what I spend on. Before I would sort of buy something nice for my kids or even for me, but now I think, do we really need this? Anything I can cut down on, I do.
I think we're all going to have to start behaving a little bit more like Lucy. Both politicians and the electorate, that's all of us, persist in believing there is some way to force growth. But with the demographic situation and with the level of debt that we have, which is enormous, it may be entirely possible that it just can't be done. Instead, we might have to stop looking for the miracle of growth to bail us out of our problems. Unless you're one of the fortunate baby boomers knocking around on the likes of Edinburgh's golf courses, you might have to lower your expectations. There will be less to spend, lower wages and fewer good jobs for the foreseeable future. How bad will it be? Well, that depends on how we decide to distribute the resources we actually have. Politicians, in their desperation to be seen to be doing something, might perhaps want to revisit the idea that no benefits for pensioners should ever be cut. Given that we've heard from at least 3 in the last 10 minutes who clearly don't need any benefits, it'd be a reasonable place to start.
Merryn Somerset-Webb. And tomorrow night, she and 2 of our other guest reporters will be joining me live to discuss when or perhaps if the UK will start to see living standards rise once again. Now, we've all had those moments, come on, you have, where we felt maybe a twinge of embarrassment at the antics of one of our countrymen or women overseas on holiday. But it's Chinese tourists who've recently found themselves at the centre of controversy and anger back home. Accounts of tourists behaving badly have been spreading like wildfire across the country. Stories like the 15-year-old boy who scratched his name onto an ancient temple in Luxor, or the woman who let her children relieve themselves on the floor of a Taiwan airport with the toilets just feet away. Things are so bad that the central government in China has reissued guidelines about what it considers to be acceptable behaviour abroad. The journalist and author Zheng Lijia told us that the cringe-making behaviour of some Chinese tourists was causing real embarrassment at home.
A few days ago, I was in Nanjing, my hometown. The news just broke out that a 15-year-old boy scratched his name at an ancient temple in Egypt. It caused such an uproar as everybody was talking about it, and many people feel so ashamed because they felt such behavior damaged Chinese people's image in the world.
Oh, really? You think that behaviour like this lets down the image of China?
Yes, I think more than ever, the Chinese people care about the image now as China is rising in the world and developing quickly economically. And I think their image should matching a country of a rising power. But unfortunately, many tourists behave so badly. Some of the tourists, they just simply do not have exposure to the outside world. Some of the tourists, they probably have money to travel abroad, but they haven't got manner or sophistication.
Should they be blamed for that? I mean, this is all relatively new to them. As you say, they haven't had the money before, they haven't had the experience of travel. You can't blame them, perhaps, for not necessarily behaving correctly in public.
I don't blame all of them, but I think there's things can be done for educating tourists. Travel agencies should have the obligation to educate them.
You mean issue sort of guidance to Chinese tourists before they go abroad?
Yes. Just recently, our Deputy Premier has issued a direction urging tourists to behave in a civilized way. I think in lots of cases, just Chinese people just lack of public concern.
I'm looking at these guidelines that were issued by the Vice Premier Wang Yang, admonishing uncivilised behaviour, saying they make a terrible racket in public places, they scrawl their names on tourist sites, they ignore red lights when crossing the road, and they spit everywhere. But weren't you a spitting champion yourself in a past life?
I'm not trying to defend them. Indeed, I used to be the spitting champion when I was working in a factory, that when we get bored, we would have a spitting competition. That shows that spitting is almost socially acceptable, but then that's changing. People are unlikely to spit if they're staying in a 5-star hotel, for example. I think Chinese people do lack public concern. For example, we're talking very loudly. When I first went to England, I think my husband was a bit embarrassed by me that I spoke so loudly because that's just the way I was brought up. Look, I don't spit anymore. But I still speak quite loudly. But no, I don't shout in the cinema.
That's the journalist Sheng Ji La. You're listening to The World Tonight with Carolyn Quinn. In a moment, we debate the ethics of robotic warfare and hear about the effects of pollution in the Niger Delta. First, a reminder of our headlines this evening. President Assad has given a defiant television interview saying his armed forces now have the balance of power in Syria's civil war. A man has been told he'll serve the rest of his life in jail for abducting and murdering 5-year-old April Jones. The government's vowed to fight a European court case which claims the UK discriminates against EU migrants. And England's scheduled friendly match against Brazil on Sunday has been suspended by a judge who said it wasn't safe for the public. Technically, they're called lethal autonomous robots. More colloquially, they're known as killer robots, weapons systems which, once activated, could lock on and kill people or hit targets, and, unlike drones, would be able to operate autonomously on the battlefield. The fictional variety has provided rich material for Hollywood.
I'm going to miss the good old days. What good old days? When people were killed by other people.
A robot cannot harm a human being. The first law of robotics.
Yeah, I know. The 3 laws. Your perfect circle of protection. What if it was given in order to kill?
The film I, Robot, starring Will Smith. Well, no killer robots have yet been used on a real battlefield, but they are being developed by the United States, the UK and Israel. There's a call now for them to be banned before they come into existence. A report presented to the UN Human Rights Council has called for a moratorium on their use, while the ethical questions that they raise are debated. Christoph Heinz, the special rapporteur who wrote the report, argues that robots could make errors of judgment that could cost civilian lives.
I think computers are typically programmed and equipped to really deal with quantitative kinds of assessments. But what you often need when life and death issues are at stake are qualitative assessments, value judgments. Just to distinguish between, for example, a group of people who are coming in your direction who may be about to surrender, often a human is more equipped to understand that this is what is happening.
So should there be a moratorium on these weapons? We brought together the military analyst Joshua Faust and first Thomas Nash from the human rights group Article 36.
I think the moratorium idea is a little bit premature. Autonomous robots don't raise any questions that non-autonomous robots don't already raise. The issues that the Stop Killer Robots campaign has raised, things like targeting selection, moral culpability, legal culpability, are big questions that we still haven't been able to solidly work out with countries that do use drones in an offensive way. So I look at this still as primarily a policy issue, and I think it's a mistake to focus on it as a technological issue the way that Christopher Heinz has been doing recently with the UN.
Well, Thomas Nash, what is the argument then from the other side?
Well, I don't see how a call for a moratorium on what would be a fundamental shift in the way we use violent force as societies could be seen as premature. Rather, I think it would be the other way around. That decisions to develop fully autonomous weapons that can make decisions themselves would seem to be premature.
Lethal autonomous robots, that's what we're talking about. And the supporters of them say that they can save lives by reducing the number of soldiers on the battlefield. Do you agree with that?
it depends whose lives you're talking about. If we're talking about wealthy, high-tech military countries making it possible for fewer of their own troops to engage in combat, then that might be the case. But what is the actual outcome of this? And would this actually make certain types of military actions more likely when they otherwise wouldn't take place?
So are you saying then, because this sort of equipment isn't available to all, it could be used by countries like Britain, by the United States, by Israel, but not available to all, then it's not fair?
Well, it's not a question of whether it's fair or not. It's a question of whether this actually allows the use of military force to take place in situations where it otherwise might not. So it makes the slide to military intervention easier, if you like, because the political boundaries associated with your own troops coming back in body bags is not there anymore.
Well, Joshua Faust, how do you respond to that?
I mean, for all the world, this sounds like the debates people had in the 1920s about the invention of air power, that it made warfare too easy, too clean, it wasn't gentlemanly enough. I mean, honestly, I think that track of argument is nonsense. Even the most critical analyses of the drone program as it exists in places like Yemen and Pakistan by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism gives a ratio of civilian casualties less than the air war over Kosovo, less than the air war over Libya.
But the drone program has been heavily criticised, hasn't it?
Heavily criticized, and a lot of that is because of the opacity that the Obama administration in particular has applied to it. They haven't been open about how they use it. They haven't been open about why they use it. And they've also been dissembling, for lack of a better word, about how they select targets and what they do with people when they do make mistakes. But those are all policy issues. Those aren't technological issues. It comes down to the policy to use them in the first place.
All right, well, if you're looking at the technology then, can a robot really distinguish between a military target and civilians?
Right now, no. And I think that's part of the reason why we haven't seen any weapons that should be able to do that deployed yet. This technology hasn't even been explored yet. We don't have the image recognition technology. We don't have the behavioral recognition technology to do that in a reliable way. And frankly, I would be very surprised if any country would field a robot weapon system that is incapable of at least matching the performance of the humans who currently run it.
Which is possibly why it is a good idea to have a moratorium then.
Maybe. That would at least keep humans in the loop all the time. But there's always a problem, at least I have an instinctive problem with an anti-technological approach to anything in general. Not that technology can solve all of our problems, but preventing technology from even maybe improving something seems to me like it's short-sighted.
I think the question is more about how we use technology, and especially how we use technology on the battlefield and for military force. A good example is the biological weapons. Right? This was on the cutting edge of science, highly, very much involved with biotechnology and research. But we decided, as societies, that we would prohibit the use of biological weapons, and so we developed a treaty to prohibit this. There are various issues with that.
It hasn't stopped them, though.
Well, it has in general. We don't have reports of biological weapons being used in a widespread way. We do have reports of explosive weapons being used in populated areas all the time, but we don't of biological weapons. So there is a stigma against that, and there is a legal prohibition. So I think there is a good precedent for certain technologies being considered and then being prohibited. Well, actually, the opportunity here is that we have a chance to prevent ourselves from going down a road with autonomous killer robots before we go down it.
Do you think it might remove human emotion from warfare so that you may not have revenge attacks, that you could almost move to a more clinical type of warfare, which sounds horrible, I know, but in a way it could be an advance on warfare?
Well, I mean, we've heard this argument that removing emotion from the battlefield will make the battlefield better, but I think there's two sides to that. Sometimes human emotion can be very important in constraining our use of force. There are very complicated decisions about distinguishing between civilians and combatants, or even combatants who are hors de combat because they're wounded or are trying to surrender. These are decisions that are very complicated and that require human judgment and moral judgment. And I think trying to say that, well, because humans are imperfect in the way that they prosecute war and apply the international rules, we should just suddenly delegate all the responsibility to machines that we've pre-programmed, that doesn't seem like the right response. The right response should be to make sure that we improve the way humans are using force around the world.
Again, the idea of not developing it. I mean, Thomas was just saying that we should allow humans to iteratively become better at what they do and become more moral and use better judgment in how they apply force. I don't see why we can't have that same iterative process with how drones operate as well. That's
Joshua Faust, and with him, Thomas Nash. Oil pollution is a massive problem in the Niger Delta. Residents complain that much of their farming land, as well as lakes and rivers, have been badly polluted by spills. Multinational oil companies admit that some are the result of corroded pipes, but they say the vast majority are caused by sabotage. Our correspondent in Nigeria, Will Ross, has been to the Niger Delta to examine two contrasting environments, an area of pristine natural beauty, as well as an area ruined by an oil spill.
Well, walking through a marshy bit. It's incredibly green around here. Palm trees, bright green grass, up almost at head height, and squelching feet. And now we've just come to a clearing. We've just gone from this beautiful, lush green vegetation now to find everything blackened. Many of the trees have died. Their charred trunks are sticking out of filthy water in which you can see the colourful sheen of the oil spill. Under the ground here there's a pipeline of the part Italian-owned Nigeria Egypt Oil Company. It says the leak was caused by people breaking into the pipe. Sabotage. People in the village disagree, but whatever the case, the pollution is devastating. Just ask Jetty Matikmo. He's a fisherman who I found walking past the oil spill.
Even now, we are suffering here. Even our crops does not grow well again.
OK, so the oil spill here means you have to travel further to fish.
Yes, we're far away because of the oil. We go far, more than 2 hours we are trekking. Very far away. That side, there is no oil, no oil that side.
The Niger Delta is often in the news because of pollution or violence, but there is another side to this place, the unspoilt areas of natural beauty. I was taken deep into the forest to see what the Niger Delta looked like before the oil. We didn't see anyone for ages, the only company, plenty of birdsong, something we hadn't heard back in the area around the oil spill. And then we bumped into a man heading home with a wooden tray of soft drinks on his head. The dulcet tones of Jim Reeves drifting out of his mobile phone. Well, we've been walking through the forest for about an hour now, and we've crossed several creeks, and it's pretty swampy where we are right now. But I'm starting to see a huge pond ahead, just through the gaps in the trees, where there's fishing going on. This really is an insight into how beautiful this landscape is and how people here for generations have lived off the land, growing crops and fishing. There was a musical welcome at a fishing camp next to the water. Every 2 years about 10 families come here and stay for the fishing season, which lasts about 3 months. The men were setting up fishing nets in the middle of the lake as the women smoked fish over fires.
I dry more than 30 fishes.
30?
Yes.
Every day?
Every day.
For mother of 3, Ovi Joe, this provides a vital income for the family.
I will use this money to pay their school fees, to buy books for them. I will use this money even to buy their school uniform and do everything for them.
Well, 2 men have just come across from the middle of the lake and they've dragged ashore a huge basket, 6 to 10 metres in length, and there are quite a lot of fish inside. The yields are pretty good. 78-year-old Woloko Inabisa is grateful that the oil has not been found in this area, because that means there's less risk of pollution.
What he's saying is that they got water for drinking, they got fishes, so there is nothing like pollution. Although if the oil prospecting companies come, they may find oil, but right now there is no oil here, so the area is okay to them.
As we walk back through the forest, there's the distant rumble of a helicopter belonging to one of the oil companies. Decades of oil production in the Niger Delta have made some well-connected people extremely wealthy. But people here living off the land tell me they've seen no benefit whatsoever from the oil money. It's not surprising then that they're hoping the oil companies stay away.
Will Ross reporting, bringing us to our closing headlines. The Syrian President Bashar Assad has used a television interview to say that his armed forces now have the balance of power and that they will strike back if Israel makes any further attack on targets inside Syria. He said Russia was fulfilling contracts to supply arms to Syria, but did not say whether his country had begun receiving new anti-aircraft missiles. In the city, the 100 share index closed up 29 points at 6,657. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones ended the day 21 points higher at 15,324. On the currency markets, the pound was up nearly a cent against the dollar at $1.52. Against the euro, it was unchanged at €1.17, making a euro worth 86 pence. That's it from all of us at The World Tonight. Thanks for listening.
Studio direction was by Darren Garrett and the editor is Tracy Rubenstein. In a moment, our book of bedtime, Blood and Beauty, continues, where the